Well, it's not working in prod. Indeed, it's not working in prod. Well, it's not my problem. It works just fine on my machine and on the dev server. Well,
I told you all systems are ISOs. And if it's working in dev, it's working in prod.
it's ISO?
Oh, yeah. Essentially, I mean, pretty much almost.
Almost? What do you mean, almost?
You know, there's maybe a very small gap in minor versions. And for some plugins. Nothing particularly important.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Peter McKee. I'm the head of developer relations here at Docker. And today I have Brandon Waterloo with us from Microsoft. Hey, Brandon, how are you?
Hey, Peter, doing well. How about you?
I'm doing good. Hello, everybody. We see you got some people in the chat. If you want, tell me where you're at. I'd love to see where people are joining in from around the world, but say hello. Welcome, everybody. Brandon, though, tell everybody where you're from, what you do. Love a little bit about yourself. Love to hear it.
Yeah, so I work in a remote office in the frozen wasteland of Michigan. It's pretty cold today. And I was actually working remotely before it was cool. So here we are. And I'm, as Peter mentioned, I'm a software engineer at Microsoft, and I work primarily on the Docker extension for VS Code.
Awesome. Yeah, that's why I love Texas. We had this little winter storm a couple weeks ago, which is but totally out of the ordinary. It's usually 100 degrees, I think, all year round. So I do miss the cold a little bit. But yeah, awesome.
I have plenty to spare if you want some. So.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna pass for right now. But yeah, yeah. I tease my family is up back in the Northeast, and on Christmas or New Year's, I'm out barbecuing on the deck, and they're in winter snow and slush. Yeah, no fun. All right,
my uncle lives in Austin, and every time we have a storm, he sends us text messages about the beautiful weather that he's having down there. It hurts.
Yeah, that's awesome. Looks like we got some bit monkeys from Zurich. Awesome. And Thomas is from Denmark. Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming on board. All right. So we were talking a little bit before we started the show around what the extension is written in. So it's written in TypeScript. Is that correct?
That's right.
And have you always been a TypeScript developer? I think maybe you came from .NET world, or?
So I've kind of done a bunch of different things. On my prior team, I did mostly C++, and some C#. And then on this team, but before taking over the Docker extension, I did almost exclusively C# in Visual Studio. And then when taking over this extension, it's pretty much all TypeScript now.
Yeah. I have mixed feelings about TypeScript. And I always say I'm going to get beat up on the internet for this. My biggest sticking point, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is the JavaScript runtime is typeless, right? So right. you have to transpile stuffs into JavaScript, right? And then you run it. Yeah, I don't know if it gives too much of a crutch to folks while they're developing and they don't actually dive down and understand prototypical inheritance, right? There aren't classes in JavaScript. I know we have the class keyword, but yeah. So I just curious to hear your thoughts. What's your been experience with TypeScript?
I enjoy it. I think it is, as you mentioned, it is really important to know like how things are actually working underneath. If you don't understand JavaScript at all, then TypeScript might actually be more of a handicap than a benefit, I guess. But I think that when you do understand it well and know how objects are treated, how they work in JavaScript, I think it is pretty valuable.
Yeah.
But the way that we like to use TypeScript in the Docker extension is basically we're only going to allow it to help us. So if there's something that TypeScript is doing that is annoying, then we'll just basically revert to JavaScript, maybe to use the any type or something like that, and do stuff like that so that we don't have to fight with TypeScript. We can just get work done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good to hear, right? I think it's definitely that balance, right? I was on a project, a big project for a company that starts with an A and sells a lot of books, let's say. And they were using TypeScript I was on the UI kind of toolkit team. And we were using TypeScript, but we weren't really, right? Like we were just using any everywhere. And a lot of it was just pure JavaScript, right? And it became painful when you started pulling in libraries and trying to use a little bit of TypeScript, we didn't have that clear way to think about when we should use TypeScript and when we shouldn't, right? And so it was just a mixed match of JavaScript and TypeScript, and it made it worse, right? But to be fair, right? Has nothing to do with the TypeScript language. It had to do with the way we were using it, right? For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like I said before, I battle back and forth, right? TypeScript brings all those modern programming constructs to JavaScript. But I still think you need to understand the way the runtime works, the way the typing system, system, the object system works, right? To really understand it. But yeah, cool. C++ back in the day, were you doing MFC? Is that even a thing anymore? Microsoft Foundation?
It wasn't MFC. So the product that I was working on was actually older than me. That was fun. It was called System Center Configuration Manager, and I think most folks outside of big enterprises won't be familiar with it. But it's basically for helping IT admins manage all of the compute resources that they have in their organizations. And I worked on a variety of different things in there, but it was basically all C++ on client server side. The UI was C#, sort of. Mm-hmm. It was basically a mix of C# and XML that got turned into XAML at runtime.
Yeah, interesting. Did you deal a lot with type conversions? Did you go from C# into C++ and back and forth, or were you doing mostly through APIs?
Not too much.
Remote? Yeah.
Yep, it was basically all over HTTP.
Yeah, I think I was doing .NET C# for a while, and I used to do C++ MFC. I mean, 20 years ago, right? And so I got tagged as the C++ guy and said, oh, integrate with this library. I think it was an encryption library to be, I think so. But anyways, it was written in C, right? And we were in C#. And man, I really struggled with, safe and unsafe blocks and, data conversions. And I forget the term to, you're wrapping up your data type and passing it across. But yeah, that was, it was painful, but I believe I was also not that well versed in it either, right? I was kind of trying to do it fast, right? Which isn't the greatest, but well, cool. We got a couple folks from India and Nicaragua. That's awesome. Hey, Enrique. Well, cool. So you're going to show us a bunch of stuff with the Docker extension and VSCode. Kind of excited. So if you're ready, I think I'll just shut up and we should just jump right into it. That's why folks are here to watch, right?
Sure. I will share my screen. All right. Hopefully folks can see.
Perfect.
So what I have here is an extremely, extremely basic Python Fast API app, and we'll have a Redis backend behind it. It's not really very interesting. I'm not a Python developer, so I can come up with something interesting if I wanted to. But anyway, what this thing is going to return is hello and world, because that's always important. A simple hit counter, and this is where Redis comes in. And then it's going to give the host name that the app is running on and the host name of the Redis host so that we can basically verify that it's connecting to what we thought it is. So the Python extension offers a lot of features, including the ability to debug. So we can just hit F5 and launch our app and then open our browser. I'll drag this over here, and every time we refresh, that hit counter increments.
Nice.
So cool. But we're here to talk about the Docker extension. So what does the Docker extension do? I think probably the first thing that many folks will encounter is the ability to scaffold. So that's what I mean by scaffolding, is adding Docker files and Docker ignores and all of that stuff that you need. So we're going to start by adding Docker files to our app so that we can containerize this. So it asks for platform. We'll do Python fast API, of course. The entry point is main.py. I'm happy with port 8000, so I'll just let that be the default. We're going to skip Docker Compose for now, and we'll get back to that in a minute. So, yep, we'll overwrite. I actually want to undo that overwrite because it keeps taking out a dependency on Redis that we need. I actually just opened a bug for that a few hours ago, so
Cool.
we'll get that fixed. But anyway, we want Redis in the requirements.txt, of course. So what this scaffold did for us is a Docker ignore, which has a bunch of stuff. Not all of it is applicable to Python, but we try and share our Docker ignore template across as much as we can. The next thing that it adds is a debug configuration for running the app in Docker. And the last thing, or the second to last thing it adds, is a couple of tasks. So Python is an interpreted language. There's no build for it, but Docker isn't like that. You do need to actually build an image and then run the image. So
Right.
what this is doing is Docker build, doing a Docker build to put together that image, and then starting the app with it. And the last thing is the Docker file, of course. This is the bread and butter of what we do. A third-party user contributes this excellent language server for our extensions so that we can have IntelliSense and tab completes and all sorts of really fun stuff like that. So I think editing Docker files is one of our greatest strengths here.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. It's super helpful with me, right? Even though I'm in it a lot of time, building Docker files, writing them all the time, it just makes it easier, right? It just makes it super easy. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Docker file is pretty straightforward. We start from slim Python image, expose 8000, set a couple environment variables, copy the requirements.txt file in and install it. And the reason we do that first is the dependencies don't change nearly as much as your actual source files. So if you copy in just this and then install it, then build caching will be able to keep everything up here. And then when you change your app, only this stuff has to get rebuilt. So it'll make your Docker builds a lot quicker. So what I want to do is go through and go ahead and do some debugging. So I'll show basically that debug configuration that we added. Let's switch to it and hit F5. So the first thing it does is that Docker build. It's doing that now. And it benefited from some caching because I'd already done that. And it starts it up and opens the browser. I'll zoom in there. So we can see here's our hit counter. It's at 24. And as I refresh, it increments, of course. So what I have running is, this is happening in WSL. And I have Redis running on the WSL server. So that's why we see host.docker.internal. That's basically saying, I'm inside the container, but I want to talk to Redis on the host. Right. So to show that, here's my WSL window. Let's open Redis CLI.
Can you, got that. Brandon, I'm sorry. Can you bump your terminal up a little bit for me, please?
Actually, I haven't done this before.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
That's better. All right. So we'll set that hit counter to, I don't know, 14. So the next time we refresh this, we should see 15. And there we go.
Cool.
So that's what's running on the host. Now, of course, it's not really that interesting to run Reddit on your host machine when you're containerizing your app. So that's where we're going to go next, is put together a service that's actually running Redis in a container as well.
Brand, can I stop you for a second? Because that was
Yeah.
pretty powerful. You know this really well, but I think so you just set up a simple little Python endpoint, right? Kind of REST endpoint. Using the extension, you created a Docker file, a Docker ignore, and then it added in tasks for you, VSCode tasks. And man, you just hit F5 and you were built the image and you were running right inside. That's pretty cool. That's pretty sweet.
Yep. And we have kind of that experience for .NET, Node, and Python.
Yeah. And how
can scaffold other platforms, but we don't have debugging built for those yet.
And so how are the the Docker ignore and the Docker files, those templates, how are those maintained, right? Is there the community can help out in that, or is it done internally, or probably a little bit of both?
So it's been kind of a long time since the shape of these templates was established, but we go through tweaks on them all the time. One of the more recent tweaks, for example, is this, where we drop down to a non-root user, so that we don't have to run as root in the container, so it's a little bit more secure. And we totally welcome community contributions on our GitHub repo. The extension is fully open source, so
yeah, okay, cool. And I'll pull up here's the Docker extension. That's a long URL. I'll drop it in the chat for everybody. And that's where you can get the extension. Here's the source code, right? Is the Docker file stuff in there in that repo? Yeah. Okay, awesome.
So it's in the resources folder and then templates, and we have basically handlebars templates for all of the stuff that we scaffold.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I haven't used handlebars in a while, but yeah, cool. Yeah, so go if you're interested, it might be an easy way to jump in and help out, right? Don't go crazy. Don't change all the Docker files. Like, these things are being used by millions of developers, right? They're pretty solid, but if you have good reasons, please do, right? Yeah, perfect. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, the next thing that I want to do is actually put that Redis cache in a container too, because that's the point. That's why we containerize this app.
Right.
So we're going to do that add compose files that I mentioned we do, and go through the questions again. We'll overwrite this and then revert it again because of that same bug. And what this created is two files, a Docker compose document and a compose debug document. And I'll touch briefly on this because it's not quite as interesting. But what the compose debug document has is it allows you to still debug, literally attach the debugger to the application as it's running. So what you can do is you do compose up on it, and you'll need to add a launch configuration for Python attach. So here we go, Python, and then it'll be remote attach. And it'll ask for host and port and stuff. And the host will be localhost because it's running locally. You can use the default port. But anyway, so we're going to look at this compose document. Now, in the source file, what we have for picking up the Redis host is either the environment variable Redis host or host.docker.internal. So we need to set the environment variable to the service that we're actually going to create. But first, let's actually make that service. So it's really easy. Done.
Nice.
All right. So what we need is an environment variable to tell our app to actually use this Redis service, or this Redis container that we're creating. And the host name for it is just the name of the service.
Yeah, Docker will set up a DNS service discovery when you run inside of Compose, and the service names will be the names of the hosts that you can look up. So that, yeah, so that's exactly. So if it changed Redis to foobar, then in the environment variable, you should have foobar in there, right?
Yep.
It's super powerful, super powerful. Doing that outside of Compose, right? You got to make sure that both containers are on the same network. You got to make sure the host names are correct, and then you got to feed that in an environment variable through the Docker run, those type of things. Yeah, Compose kind of brings all all together for you. It's nice.
Yep. We like it for that. So
Yes.
we'll start this up. And that's going to compose up our app. Benefits again from the caching that's already been happening. And we've got it running. So we've got, this is the API container itself. And then here's the Redis container. So let's open this thing up in the browser. I'll pull this tab over. So cool, we've got our hit counter. The host name is the container ID, and the Redis host name is actually Redis this time because we're talking to that container.
Yeah,
so
cool.
We've got our hit counter going there. It's great. So I'm going to knock that down and then start it back up a second and show something, because there's a problem here. So we've got it started back up, open in browser. Our hit counter is back at 1. So all of that data that we're persisting in Redis is not actually persisting.
Right.
And of course we want it to persist. That's kind of helpful. So the way you do that is with a quick volume entry. So you can create a named volume and you map it to the /data folder. And then you reference that volume down here so that the volume gets created and it will persist. So now that we have that written in, let's start the app up again. Get our browser window, and we'll expect it to start at 1, but then when we restart, it should continue, it should stay where it was. So it's at 1 and we're incrementing now. And when we stop this service and restart it, we want to see it back at 17, I think it was.
Somewhere around there. I'm glad you paid attention.
All right, there we go, 17. Just
Nice.
what we wanted to see. So now the state is actually getting persisted in a name volume for us.
Awesome.
So cool. You've got your app. It's ready to go. It does all the features that you need it to. It's not a terribly interesting app, I'm sorry to say. But what we can do next is you need to push that image up somewhere so that you can get a deployment going. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to knock this back down a second. So the image that we're creating from that build is this MyFast API latest. So we're going to push this. And I'm going to pick Azure, but you can absolutely deploy to Docker Hub as well, and a few others. So I've got this container registry already created, and we're going to push to it. And it'll give you a last chance to change the tag in case you think there's something else that needs changing, but it helps you get the tag built so that you don't have to think about what it's supposed to be.
Nice.
So it starts by logging into that container registry and goes through with pushing the image, which is what it's doing right now.
And that's using Docker under the covers, right? You can see it right there. Yeah, I'm sure you could have used the ACI command line or whatever, but
yeah. So we like to. There are things that we do in the background because they're probably commands that we don't think are that interesting to users. So like if I go remove one of these images, I'll do this one. If I remove this one, it's not going to do the docker RMI command because it's not that interesting. But for stuff like docker build, docker run, any of the compose commands, docker push, we show it in the terminal because we want people to see what we're doing. And if they want to copy paste this into CI/CD build pipeline or something like that, they can do it really easily.
Yeah. I think is sometimes as engineers, right, we want to do we want to put the abstraction layer over top, but then sometimes it creates magic, right? And you're like, right. what is going on, right? And engineers are curious people to begin with, right? And it's nice. I've noticed that when I use the extension, it gives me the command. And I actually copy and paste those out of there and kind of look at, okay, especially the debug inside of containers and stuff. It's like, this is interesting to see, get my mind around how things are working, right?
Yeah,
super helpful.
it's a fairly complicated process, more so for .NET, I think, because with .NET, we do some magic in order to make debugging fast, but we do our best to make magic that doesn't get in the way, I guess.
Yeah.
So as an example, with .NET, you need to, it's not an interpreted language. You need to build it. So we build it locally and then map in the built binaries into the container, because that's much, much quicker than building it in the container each time you change the app. And then we also map in the location for the debugger, because it would be a lot quicker to just map it in than it would be to download the debugger, of course.
Right. Yeah, cool.
So we're going to make a couple of quick changes here to our compose document, because we want to deploy this up in Azure container instances. So the first thing we need to do is change the image name, because now that it's pushed up, it needs to have the actual container registry that it's in. And then the other thing that we're going to need to do is change the volume driver for this volume so that it uses an Azure storage file share. And I'm going to just copy what I have from before so that I don't have to try and remember it.
Yeah.
So the driver here is going to be Azure file. This is the storage account that it targets, and it'll make a volume share called my file share.
Yep. And just a quick note to everybody out there, right? You see, even Brandon, who works on this extension with Docker every day, and myself too. Yeah, we have snippets of code everywhere, so you don't have to remember everything, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What is it? Work smarter, not harder. I don't know. We'll put it in that bucket, but yeah.
Yep. So I'm going to create an ACI context here, which is a relatively new feature that we've got. So I've already got one created, but I'm going to make another one here. We'll call it ACI2. It'll ask me for a resource group, which I'll just use this BWater resource group that I've got. And here we go. So we're going to switch over to it. Now in ACI, it's a runtime for containers, which means there's not images there. There's only containers. So you'll see once the switch is finished, this view is not supported in the current Docker context because there are no images in ACI.
Right.
There are images in ACR, Azure Container Registry, and we can see that image that we just created, that my fast API latest right here, pushed 8 minutes ago, or built 8 minutes ago, I should say, and pushed probably more recently than that.
Yeah.
But cool. Now we want to deploy this app that we just created in ACI. It's really easy. You just do compose up.
Yeah. And that's
takes a little bit longer because it is deploying a live service, but it is that easy.
Yeah. Yeah. The context, little color around contexts are, you can think of a context as anywhere that can run containers, right? And not anywhere. We have limited places we point to right now, but that's not by design, right? The context is designed to be able to use the same commands you do running locally, working locally, running compose locally, but run them in a cloud, right? And so you can create a context that points into ACI, like Brandon just did. You switch context with same commands that we were running locally. Now we can run right in ACI. It's very seamless, but it's not super seamless. Like you saw Brandon go in and change what image we're using, set up the volumes, right? You can do different things like that, networking and whatnot. So you do have some differences between local and the cloud, but you can manage that with some compose override files and stuff like that. But yeah, it makes it super easy, and especially the sharing your app. Let's say you're working on a team and you have a PM, business owner, and you made a quick change. You want to share it with them really fast. Create your images, point to ACI, run them there really fast, give the URL, and your teams can, people on your team can see it, view it very fast. Super powerful. And you can run production loads in it too, right? It's definitely a production workload running. Yeah,
so we've got it running now. It took 40 seconds. So just like before, we have this open in browser. And it's going to ask if we are okay opening this external site, which of course we are. It's the one we want to open. And I'll zoom in again. Here we are. So hello world, the hit counter is restarted, of course, because it's now a file share in Azure. Here's the host name of that container and the host name of the Redis server that it's talking to, still Redis. So we can bump that hit counter a few times. And
Nice.
I'll close that. And we're going to take this back down and then put it back up and show that the file share gets reused. It's still happening, or it's still being used. So it does give a warning saying that we're not deleting the file share. Use Docker volume RM if you want to delete the volume. Of course, we don't want to delete the volume, so we're going to start this back up. Hopefully it'll be a little bit quicker this time. And if I remember right, I think we're at 15 should be the hit counter.
It should be more than one, right? Let's
Should be more than one for sure.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and relatively speaking, that ACI spin up was pretty quick, right? The first one. In some other cloud platforms that shall be remain nameless, it's not as fast, but we're getting there, right? But yeah, super cool.
It seems like on average for me, it's around 20 seconds.
Yeah, that's. I mean, we get
surprisingly variable.
Yeah, 20 seconds isn't bad, right? Relatively speaking. I mean, we get yeah, we have these powerful machines local, and we're all building and doing a lot of stuff locally, so we think instantly, I guess. But yeah, it's pretty darn quick.
All right, it was exactly the same as last time. How about that? 41.2. All right, and we can open a browser. It's totally different IP address. Drag it over, and the hit counter, I was right, it's at 15.
Nice.
And different host name. I didn't remember or write down what the last one was, but different IP address, totally different service, has the same data backing it.
Yeah, cool. Super cool. So can I want to start asking some questions about the extension and how it kind of works a little bit or whatever. But yeah, so how do you guys tie into Docker? Are you running your own instance of Docker? Is it how does that kind of set up?
Yeah, so we basically depend on Windows and Mac Docker Desktop and on Linux Docker CE. Mm-hmm. And we use a mix of things to do basically all of our interaction with Docker. We use the CLI in cases like this where we're showing it in the window. We are literally calling this CLI, and you get to see the output straight from the CLI.
So Brandon, you're spawning a process, and then right. Yeah, okay, cool.
Yep. And then for most of the stuff that happens in the Explorer here, we use a node library for talking with Docker called Dockerizing.
Oh, nice. And is that an open source? Is that a library that you guys all maintain, or does it?
It's open source. We are not the maintainers of it, but we use it.
Yeah, nice. And that'll make so a little bit about the way the Docker platform is set up. So you have a Docker engine, which is run as a daemon on the host system, right? And the way desktop works is it creates a VM. Won't dive too deep in the difference between WSL2 and Mac and all those type of stuff. But suffice to say, it creates a VM to run the engine inside of it. Runs a Docker engine inside of a Linux VM. And then your CLI is native to either Windows or Mac. Right. And then you do a little bit of networking magic, right? Basically port forwarding into the engine inside of the VM to run its commands. And the reason being is containers are specific to the platform you're running on because they share the operating system. They virtualize the operating system. But inside of a container, that process is running is a native operating system process. Right. So a little different than virtual machines, where virtual machines, you virtualize the hardware and you install operating systems on top of it. And you virtualize the hardware and have multiple OSs. With containers, you're virtualizing the OS and have multiple processes running on top of that OS that are isolated, right? So that's why they speed up really fast. But at the base of it, it's a native operating system process, right? So that's why you can't run a Win32. Is it even Win32 anymore? Do they call it Win32, Win64?
Still gets called Win32
I think it is. Yeah. So, yeah. So you get a Win32 process inside of Windows. And if you tried to run that container on a Mac, right, of course, the Mac doesn't understand those bits, right? It's a different architecture. So that's basically how it works. Sets up a little client server. The Docker CLI is pointed into the engine that sits inside of the VM. Of course, on Linux, it's all run native, right? You don't have to have a VM. You connect to it directly. Sorry for that little detour, but I thought it might be interesting. I know I repeat that a lot. So if you watch the show, but it's very important to understand that foundation of how images and containers, right? Perfect.
Yeah.
And so, it's set up it's set up as a REST API. So the panels on the left is calling into that REST API through this node library, correct?
Exactly.
Perfect. Cool.
Yeah. So I've been back and forth to this tab quite a bit, but I want to kind of highlight how powerful it is, what sorts of things that it can help you do easily. So you've got like images here. Let's just say I want to run this Alpine image and do it interactively, and I can list contents of a directory or anything like that. And we use the --rm, so when this shuts down, it will automatically be removed. You can customize that command as well using different settings. So there, it's removed. We can run it. Actually, that one will shut down immediately. Here, we'll run our site. So we can run that. That'll go in the background, and hey, we can remove it, stop, start, open in browser. You can attach VSCode, which basically uses remote containers to attach to this container. View the logs. Let's try that.
Nice.
There we go. Cool. You can manage containers, images, contexts, networks, and volumes. So you've got those volumes left over from earlier. Let's just clean those up because we don't need them anymore. And it'll take out all of those volumes for us. I'm done with this ACI context, so we can remove that too. So this makes it a lot easier to manage a variety of different things. And another feature that I like is the ability to flag and pull images really quickly and easily. So first I'm going to remove those to make a little more space. But let's say you've got an image that's out of date. This Redis one was released just a day ago, Alpine just 20 hours ago. When you start it up, if you've got an image that's not up to date with what's the latest on the latest publicly available version of that image, then it'll give kind of a little yellow warning icon here and say out of date, so that you can just right click it, pull. All you got to do, it'll pull the latest version of that image. Now this one, of course, is already up to date, so it's not that interesting, but it helps you keep your images up to date, which helps you make more secure applications.
Yeah, and it's good to note, right, that our tags are mutable. So if you have now in practice, a lot of official images, right, do not mutate their tags, right? So if you get a, Buster, whatever it is, should always point to that image. But latest typically points to the latest, right? So if you're using latest and you haven't pulled, you might have a new latest up there. I recommend only using latest for development and quick things, right? I use it a lot in demos, but when you're going to production, you should really pin to a specific tag, right? Or to a SHA, so you know exactly what image you're getting, because they could be, let's say you're using a, something in a container that's built by other team members or another team, and they update it and you're using latest, you could accidentally update to the latest and get breaking changes, right? So for production and any kind of, when you want to lock down that environment, I suggest using specific tags, right?
Yeah. And in like Python, Node, .NET, all of those, we do actually do a pinning like that to a major and minor version so that we can be confident we're not going to get breaking changes picked up accidentally like that.
Yeah, cool. Cool. Well, so you can see your volumes, you can see your networks, you can add registries, right? And then you have context. We talked about context and managing your images. So you can stay, I love the extension, right? Because it reduces context switching. So you have all your Docker bits and things you want to interact with in a panel. You also have your interactive terminal, right? So all that alt tabbing that you do a lot of times between VS Code and back in terminal, back and forth. You can start minimizing that little bit by jumping in the terminal and right over to the extension, right? And I have to be honest, right? I'm an old, an old salt, right? And I'm like, nope, you got to be in a pure text editor. You got to be in your terminal, right? And then I started forcing myself to use these tools, right? And my productivity has skyrocketed, right? It's like, I don't need to type Docker remove, right? Just right click and remove the image, right?
Yeah. Like, and another thing that I want to point out is that you don't have to come to this tab to do a lot of these commands like removing images and things. So I'll start over here in the Files tab. In VS Code, you spend almost all of your time here. We can just do remove container. There it is. Containers remove. And here we go.
Nice. Oh, and it looked like you could you remove multiple containers there, it looked like?
Yep. And you can multi-select here as well. So I'm going to take out both of these. So multi-select works in both places.
That I just pause right there. That honestly is extremely powerful, right? Because I usually have to do a Docker image ls, right? Or Docker images, see all my images. Then I got to go grab the IDs, right? Do a Docker remove, paste all the IDs in, right? There, just select them, right click, gone. Super quick. Yeah. What else? Tell us, give our only for live viewers right now. We'll delete this out on, no, I'm just kidding. What's some of the other shortcut? What's the shortcut key just to get to the Docker whale? Is there one? I should know this.
Not by default, but the nice thing about VS Code is you can assign shortcut keys to do anything that you want. So let's
that's true.
Keyboard shortcuts. I think it's going to be Docker view. Focus on containers view. That'll take us to this containers view, which will switch the tab. So I'm going to think of a key binding that's probably not taken. Notepad 9. Sure. Control numpad 9. It's a terrible key binding, but I want to demonstrate this. So here, I'll go over here, control numpad 9.
Nice.
Straight to the tab. And then back here, the editor is control shift E.
Yeah. I know that one by heart, the E, control E. Yeah, cool. Awesome, man. Well, that was great. I really appreciate it. Anything else you want to dive into? Or I think we got a really good overview of it. Any questions out there? Jose said control B for containers. Isn't that bold? Don't you bold your code? Jose, you're not bolding your code. Shame on you. Totally kidding. Totally kidding. Yeah, I've
probably a setting for that.
My fear is I always go in VS Code, right? And I start changing key bindings, and then I overwrite something that I was using, and then I got to go and find it, and then I just always get messed up. Yeah, make sure you take it back off. You're gonna hit a Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much, man. I really, really appreciate it. So I wanted to ask you, what are you excited about coming up? What if you're allowed to speak about it, what features are you guys working on? What's something interesting?
Yeah, so we're always working on this, and we're also gaining new capabilities from things that VS Code adds to the extensibility API. So our capabilities are always growing. One of the more recent things that we have added is the ability to start up a subset of the services in your compose files. So I'll do compose up select services, and it'll look through and see there's these two services in my app. And if you're debugging maybe just a part of your whole application, you only need 2 of the services running, then you can check those off and start just that and not have to start everything in your app.
Oh, cool. And are you doing a little compose file underneath? Are you modifying compose file, or how are you guys doing that?
Don't have to. So we have Docker has the command. I'll get a new terminal. There we go. So Docker compose config services. And that looks through and grabs us the services. So we don't have to parse it, which is great because I don't want to. And then when we do compose up, we just pass the service name at the end of the compose up command, and that's all it takes.
Yeah. Nice. Cool. Yeah, that's really powerful there. I could see that in a very heavy microservices, even if you just have 10 that are on your local team, right? And you have them all in compose file. It's like, I don't want to spin up all these. I just need these 2, right?
Yeah. I think one more thing that I should probably point out is the tasks that we have. So tasks in VS Code are basically, for the most part, it's like process things that you need to start. So like a .NET build will be a task. The Docker build and Docker run, we implemented tasks. So we have a compose task.
Cool.
And the way that it does things is basically Docker compose. You can have either up here, or if you want, you can make a down. It'll require one or the other because, of course, you need one or the other.
Right.
But it'll give you this Docker compose up. It basically lists the files, and that'll add that -f, this file, in the order that you list them here. And you can get at that services thing right here and say, like, I only want to start the Redis service here.
Yeah.
Not a terribly interesting app, but when you want to run this task, do run task and pick that compose up task, and it'll start. And the only thing that it'll start up is when it does. Oh, it's still creating.
Oh, that's cool. And so inside that,
that's why I forgot to take that out, and I'm on local context again.
Oh yeah.
All right, let's do that again. There we go. So yeah, it starts up our do nothing service that only has a Redis cache.
Yeah. But Jose says using an extension at work, this is great power. Yeah, it's super powerful. I agree. Again, like I said, I've when VS, I got to be honest, when VS Code first came out, I was a Sublime guy, right? Just pure text editor. I had color, syntax highlighting, and that was it, right? And I had used Visual Studio for years, and I did a little detour into the Java world, right? This is early 2000s. Yeah, I know that was a while ago. All you young developers out there, but yeah, I was a Java developer, right? And the tooling was just horrible. And you're writing XML everywhere. And before that, I was doing a lot of, I was in the Microsoft world. And I came back to .NET when I switched companies, right? And we were just right at I think .NET was 2000. I think 2001 was maybe the release. Someone in chat, let me know. But anyways, I mean, the tooling that Microsoft builds is just world-class, right? World-class. So anyways, fast forward, I was doing a lot of JavaScript and Node and using just Sublime, and VS Code came out. And I really hesitated to go to it, right? I was like, it's too heavyweight for me. It's too heavyweight. But once we were talking a little bit before the show started about running a Windows machine, and I was like, I just need to run it for a month, right? And just force myself. And that's what I did with VS Code. I said, I'm going to use VS Code, right? And fell in love with the power, right? The extensions, the themes, just everything you can do with it is just amazing, right? And the debugging, the simplicity, and how everything connects in is just super powerful. Yeah. If you can't tell, I'm a fanboy of VS Code now. I will never go back to Vim or Emacs or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Careful. We're going to start a war here.
Yeah, I know. And hey, I take that when we were talking about TypeScript earlier, I wanted to say it's really I look at it as an internal discussion. Like it's like, at least from my point of view, it's fun to discuss. It's fun to talk about languages and tools, right? But I don't get super religious about it, right? You know, it's like whatever works, use that, right?
Yeah, each team and each dev needs to figure out what works best for them.
Yeah, 100%. Well, let me ask you this as we kind of wrap up here, but are you a language nerd at all? Do you watch any kind of languages? Are you learning any new programming languages?
I watch TypeScript pretty closely, unsurprisingly. I watch C# less closely, but still keep an eye on it. I can at least read a bunch of different languages. So C, C++, Python, Docker files, HTML, tons of different things. I don't do much writing in things other than TypeScript and C# these days. So I'm sure I've violated some convention on this file alone. But it runs, so I'm happy enough with it for now.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah, I'm a friend of mine. We were texting back and forth, and he mentioned a book to me called 7 Programming Languages in 7 Days or 7 Weeks. Can't remember exactly. It's an older book. I think came out around 2000. But I just checked it out. I just purchased it. It's really cool, right? It's some not older languages, but you know, there's some newer languages since then. But it takes the approach of from a seasoned developer how to learn a different language, right? It's one of the challenges for me is, I understand languages and you try and go to like Go or something. And, it starts very basic, right? Here's if statements, here's what variables are. And it's like, okay, I understand all that programming, world, right? It's like, I want to jump into the specifics. So it's a very interesting book. So I would recommend people check it out. I'm working through it now. I'm enjoying it. There's a second book on it. Another 7 languages in 7 weeks, surprisingly, to steal your term. But yeah, it looks really interesting. But yeah, so awesome, man. Thank you so much for joining us. We're closing up here at time. If anybody has any, 2000, the .NET framework came out and released in 2002. I think where I was at, we were starting to use it at 2001, probably in beta, and we're switching over. But yeah, I love C#, by the way. I love the .NET framework, C#. C# just, super powerful. Easy
That's
language.
something that sort of scares me about working in Node is basically what VS Code is running in. You have like 3,000 package dependencies or transitive dependencies, and you're sort of relying on the goodwill of everybody to not do terrible or bad things with that, and that scares me, honestly.
Yeah.
And there have been problems in the past where a malicious node pack or a good node package became a malicious node package, and a lot of bad resulted from that. And in contrast, at least to me, I see the .NET framework where you have basically everything you could ever imagine. There's a library for that. Like, I remember one that maybe surprised me the most. We were working on my old team. We needed to do some signed XML. There's a library for signed XML in .NET framework.
Yeah.
Wow. I would not have guessed that, but they have it right there. All you have to do is give it a cert to go with, and done.
Yeah. Yeah. And two, in the news here lately, right? The software supply chain is getting attacked pretty hard, right? With these repositories, NPM, and it is scary, right? It's, we got to do better, right? Deno is coming out, or is out, right? And maturing. I don't know if you played around with that at all. And I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Maybe it's Dino. I'm not sure. It's probably Dino, because I think their mascot is a dinosaur, but I failed English multiple times, so we'll call it Deno. Yeah, it's super scary, right? I used to tease my last boss. I was like, well, we're working on this bit, and he's like, there's got to be an NPM package for it. Just go download it. And he would literally like search and then find one. I'm like, yeah, and that has 2 stars, right? Like, who wrote that? Where is it? Right? Like, sure, it works, and then we're mining bitcoins up in production, right?
Surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much again for showing up and joining us. We got to have you back again. Here at Docker, we love you guys. As you know, we have a good relationship. So excited to see what's coming up, what's coming out. And stay tuned, everybody. We'll definitely have Brandon back on for sure if he's willing to join us. But yeah,
glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, let me. Where can folks find you online if they want to reach out?
So probably the easiest way to find me is going to be on that GitHub repo. We have basically everything that we do is out in the open. It's all open source code. It's open source issues. The builds happen in DevOps, but they are also open, so you can see everything that we're doing.
Perfect. Awesome. And I will here's the Docker extension. You could also get it when you're in VS Code, right? And that'll easily pull you in. And then I put the source code, the GitHub repo, into the chat so you guys can click on it a little bit easier. But that's the repo that holds the source code. Go check it out. I would suggest even just just go read through it. Right? Doesn't necessarily mean you have to start contributing onto it. But yeah, go read through it. I think a great place to start in open source to contribute is documentation. I know everybody says that, but it is a really good place, right? You need to understand the code base, right? Not at a super deep level. And then being able to write what your source code is doing is a very, very powerful skill set, and is very, very needed in the open source community, right? So if you have that source kit, that ability, right? The aptitude to do that, you'll crush it in the open source, right? Awesome. Well, let me go through my little thing here before we sign off. But please join our Docker community. Best way to get connected with us. Get into our community Slack channel. A bunch of Docker employees are in there. Our engineers are in there. We have fabulous captains that are in there and can help out with issues that you have. They're phenomenal. Please join us in the community. You can also see what meetups. A lot of our meetups are virtual now. Some of them are coming back a little bit in person, but join our meetup group so you can get a local meetup. And then also too, I know I say this every show, but check out the roadmap. It is our public roadmap. I had Ben on last week. We talked about the roadmap. He's a principal product manager, and they're in there. Our CEO's in there. Head of product are in there. We do use that for sure. And last but not least, DockerCon registrations are open. Go sign up, register. It's free. It's going to be May 27th, I believe. All online, all virtual. We got a great lineup coming up. We're going to be doing some new things for DockerCon, so you're not going to want to miss it. But I'm involved in the CFP process, so we got a lot of great talks coming in. Some very good beginner stuff, and then some very, very advanced deep dive talks coming up. So please register. It's free, and love to see you there. Again, Brandon, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, stay warm if you want.
I'm doing my best.
I'm going to be barbecuing tomorrow night, so if you want to come down, visit your uncle, and just come over, we're going to have barbecue. So
sounds good.
All right, man. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you joining, and we'll see you next week.